Albinism by Lauren, Madeline, Shreyas, and Lorelai. What is albinism? Albinism is a genetic condition that affects the level of melanin pigment in skin, hair, and eyes. The visual effects of albinism include low vision, blurred vision, and light sensitivity. The skin effects of albinism include loss of color or pigment and freckles. 7 different kinds of albinism have been identified up to date. Some types of albinism only affect the eyes. Others affect the pigment in skin and hair. A common misconception about albinism is that they all have red eyes. This is not true.
As we know, albinism is a disorder caused by a mutation in the DNA. This mutation is the deletion of TYR, also known as tyrosinase. The deletion of this amino acid causes for a lack of melanin in the skin. Tyrosinase's purpose is to synthesize melanin pigment. However, the TYR gene, there is no tyrosinase to synthesize. The way occult-cutaneous albinism is passed on is an autosomal recessive pattern. This means that both copies of a gene, both parents, have mutations. Many people carry the disorder but do not show symptoms. Below is a representation of a frame shift mutation of the albinism gene.
Albinism is a spontaneous mutation, meaning that it is an error as a result from the natural biological processes in the body. Because there are many different types of albinism, some types are autosomal recessive, like oculocutaneous albinism, and others are transmitted as a sex-linked or autosomal recessive disease, like ocular albinism. Parents who carry the disease do not show signs of albinism, but 2 parent carriers have a possibility of their child inheriting the disease.
This pedigree chart shows that Jody and Tom, who are both carriers of oculocutaneous albinism, have 3 generations of children.
These Punnett squares show the probability of albinism in this family. In these Punnett squares, oculocutaneous albinism is a recessive trait represented by the lowercase a. The dominant trait, not having albinism, is shown by the capital A. It is clear here that albinism is not extremely common in this family.
Albinism occurs in all racial and ethnic groups, but is most prevalent in Africa. In America, albinism affects fewer than 200,000 Americans. Throughout the world, 1 in every 18,000 to 20,000 people have albinism, but in some areas, the likelihood of albinism is 1 in every 3,000 people. In southern Nigeria, where albinism is very prevalent, 1 in every 5,000 people have albinism, with 40% of the Nigerian albino population being children. This is because in some African regions, people with albinism are killed or ostracized because they are presumed to be cursed or bring bad luck. The reason why albinism is more prevalent in certain groups of people or in islands like Fiji is because the areas are secluded, and this leads to less genetic diversity. Albinism is diagnosed if the patient presents symptoms to their doctor. You are usually tested as a child or infant because it is usually easily detectable. Ways to definitely find out that you have albinism is through genetic testing. You can also have a physical exam or an eye exam, as most forms of albinism affect your eyesight. And you can also have a general comparison of your skin's pigmentation to that of your family members. Your doctor might also review your medical history to see if you have any conditions associated with albinism, like poor eyesight or sensitivity to light.
Since albinism is a genetic disorder, it is not able to be cured. Luckily, we're able to prevent its symptoms. As a person with albinism has a lack of melanin in their skin, they are at increased risk of sunburn and skin cancer, which are caused by sunlight damaging their skin. Ways to prevent sun damage is applying sunblock. Sunblock protects against the sun's UV rays, which can damage the skin over time. Also, they can wear sun-protective clothing. Sun protective clothing will reduce exposure to the sun's UV rays, which can damage the skin over time. In addition, people with albinism are born with impaired vision. They should wear glasses, contacts, and corrective lenses to correct or improve their vision. They can also perform eye muscle surgery, since their eyes might not be aligned or may be wiggling.
What is the prognosis? Life expectancy is not usually shortened by albinism. However, people with albinism might have to limit sun exposure because their skin cannot tolerate strong sunlight. There is no current cure for albinism, but recently, research has been done by the UCLA Stein Eye Institute. Crandall University on Visual Impairment and Blindness in Emerging Adulthood is another institute that is working to discover a cure for albinism. This research is primarily about the effects on the eyes of people with albinism.
This is a personal testimony from DeAndre Forrest. I had neighborhood friends who asked my older brother if I was adopted. In school or even on the train with my mom, there would be parents and adults who'd stared at my brother and me and laughed at us. I didn't understand why.
This is a personal testimony from Kelly Gallagher. I'm delighted that the coverage of the Paralympics at Sochi 2014 has showcased a positive image of people with albinism. To ski at speeds of 110 kilometers per hour in front of a worldwide audience is a real pleasure, and I feel that it is changing people's perceptions and attitudes to disability. My guide, Charlotte Evans, and I were amazed to be on the covers of national newspapers and news programs when we won our historic gold. She also said, "Yes, I do look different from other women. I have very blonde hair, tend to wear sunglasses or squint in bright light, and have to read with a magnifier. However, thanks to my parents, I've grown up with the confidence to know that I am really no different to anyone else."
In conclusion, albinism is a fairly rare disease that affects the pigment found in hair and eyes. Albinism does not result in a shorter lifespan, but it does require protection from intense sunlight. There is no current cure for albinism, but it can be treated by applying sunscreen, wearing corrective lenses, and consulting doctors. Thankfully, many research facilities are looking into cures and further preventions of albinism.